Hello there. I'm Bob Plankers. I'm a Senior Technical Marketing Architect with VMware Corporation. And it's my pleasure to talk to you today about, well, it was going to be 9 ways to improve your security with vSphere, vSAN, things like that. But I'm getting a little cute. 107 ways. The 107 ways will be basically the last slide. So you got to stick around to see what it is. Yeah, I hope you're all doing well. I miss actually talking at VMUGs, and so... but I will say that if you are watching this live, I'm probably in the chat, out in the live chat somewhere, and I've probably said something already. If not, I'll be there in just a second. And so if you've got questions, put them out there and I'll answer. Yeah, well, let's get moving. We've only got 30 minutes and 107 things to talk about. That's a lot, right? So I always like talking about security in context of the CIA triad. You know, we always think of security as confidentiality, just keeping our data to ourselves, keeping it safe. But there's 2 other main big areas to it. Integrity, the idea that when I leave a system, leave data somewhere, I want to return to it and have that data be in the state I expect. You know, whether it's been processed by something or not, you know, and certain things, bit rot on storage arrays, that's an integrity problem. And, you know, even ransomware maybe can be an integrity problem. Ransomware is also an availability problem. And availability is a big thing in security. Being able to use your systems, being able to use your data. And, you know, and having that availability, being able to patch. Patching is really just a series of small scheduled outages, right? And we should be able to do that. But availability often gets short shrift because it costs money. It requires a little bit of thinking. You need load balancers sometimes. And maybe just having hard conversations about, you know, actual maintenance windows, things like that. We're going to talk about that. Don't want to get too ahead of myself here. I will say, though, that one of the things in all of this in security is education of the people around us, education of our managers, education of at least I spent 23 years out in enterprise IT, and I really discovered that a lot of people don't understand, most people don't understand vSphere like you do. And so educating people that most of the features in vSphere speak to risk mitigation of some sort, risk management of some sort, and risk avoidance, all that stuff. We can file most of the features in vSphere into one of these 3 categories, into confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And so I've done that here. This is by no means a complete list of features. We've got hundreds and hundreds of features in vSphere. It's actually a really complicated product in that regard, feature rich, really, yeah, you know, I'm not going to get into it. I am a marketing guy. You got to excuse me a little bit. But I will also say that security is always a trade-off. It's always a slider between security and something else, often usability, budget, staff time, sysadmin will to live, you know, that sort of thing. And you can make people's lives miserable by turning it up to 11, you know, to borrow the cliche from the movie, it's a balancing act. It really is. Too much security it gets in your way, and the concept of an opportunity cost comes in there. Too little security, you have breaches, and you got to report things to the feds and SEC and go out of business and things like that and get sued. You know, that's not good either, clearly. But, you know, finding that trade-off is really important. And so, you know, that's the thing here. And so we're going to talk about that. So let's get to it. Number 1 step, network isolation. Becoming a really important thing, especially with ransomware, creating hard boundaries around things. And I know we talk about making the boundaries more flexible for users and working at home and that. Yeah, our infrastructure management interfaces still need some of that. And I think we need to do better about it. And I run into, on a weekly basis, I run into somebody that doesn't believe in firewalls. You know, firewalls are complicated, they say. Yeah, they are. You know, they do add a layer of complication. They also add a layer of defense in depth, a layer of friction for attackers, you know, and for authorization. And yeah, it's helpful. So perimeter firewalls around your infrastructure, Privileged access workstations. And I'm certainly not the first person to talk about this. Microsoft actually talks a lot about this with regard to Active Directory. How do you keep Active Directory secure? And, the idea of a privileged access workstation, a workstation that maybe VPNs, one of the designs that I helped build back in the day with my organizations was we actually VPN'd into a protected network inside of our other protected networks. And additional layers of security there. We had firewalls inside of firewalls, and we just did it with VPNs, yeah, but with VMs running on Workstation or Fusion on our desktops, and that added another layer of security there, another layer of complication, another perimeter to watch that we can monitor. Another thing I like pointing out is hardware management backdoors. The ILOs and iDRACs and the xClarity hardware management controllers of the world, they're very helpful. There's a lot of great features in them. Some of those features can be leveraged by attackers to do bad things, and to circumvent, to come in and get the console on a machine, be able to, some of them present USB NICs to ESXi, and that's a backdoor now. Now is there a route around things? Yeah, sometimes you might want to check that. Shut it off if you don't need it. A lot of these things are very self-sufficient, and so you can do hardware monitoring in that through them directly. It speaks to another thing, limiting trust. Really asking ourselves, why do we trust who we trust? And I guess that's my third point here. Hey, let's go backwards. Who do you trust and why? Why do we trust our corporate Active Directory? What happens? How do we know that that's not compromised? How do we know what happens if that does get compromised? If a domain user is able to elevate their privileges to domain admin. The Microsoft Zero Logon vulnerability was really scary in that regard because it allowed somebody to do exactly that. And so a budding ransomware infection became a full-blown one. You had attackers that basically had domain admins. And then what could they do? Well, they could add themselves, if you control authorization into your infrastructure, into your storage arrays, into your vSphere environments with an AD group, all they do is add themselves to the VMware users group, or not VMware users, but VMware admins group that you have. And then they can just log in, right? So that's actually my first point here. We need to separate that to help mitigate problems with trust. We can separate that a little bit. Well, sure, we use corporate Active Directory for authentication, but we don't use it for authorization. We use an SSO group for authorization instead, and that's a recommendation that I make very often, actually, and it's taking hold. The idea that corporate ADs might not be the bastions of security that we all want them to be. Nothing against them, but just the design. They're big targets. And then the idea of loose coupling. Loose coupling is an idea that I got a long time ago. I was a software developer once, and a long time ago I read a book, Code Complete 2 by Steve McConnell, Microsoft Press. And there's 2 pages in there, pages 80 and 81, I think, desirable characteristics of a design. And I think they're well worth looking up. One of them is called loose coupling. Well, one of them is minimize complexity. And I urge you to do that in your environments as well. Throw out anything you don't need. The easiest thing to secure is something that doesn't exist. Second, loose coupling. The idea that makes systems able to operate independently of each other. You often see this with the single panes of glass. People want single panes of glass, and that's great. Now you've tied a whole bunch of systems together very tightly. So in order to upgrade one, you have to check all of them. And that's a mess. Who wants to do that? Nobody wants to do that. And you've tied them all together so tightly that you're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to upgrade. You're barely going to patch, if at all. And attackers, they love that. A friend of mine and former coworker used to call them single glasses of pain, and that's exactly what they are. So, the idea of loose coupling, separate them. Don't create links between things unless you absolutely have to. And you can stay agile. You can stay. You retain the availability, especially if there's an outage or something in one of the systems. It doesn't take everything with it either, So that's my plug for that. Number 3, Skyline Health and good monitoring. The good monitoring, yeah, you understand. Good monitoring is very important. Enables the confidentiality, integrity, and availability sorts of security things. We can monitor for that sort of thing. But Skyline Health in particular, I actually really like it. I wish it really existed when I was a customer. You have to turn on the CEIP, the Customer Experience Improvement Program. It's a terrible name. Don't tell anybody that I said that. But SEEP? Who calls something the SEEP? You know, that's... but that's telemetry. You're going to send us some data, and actually in return, you're going to get an immediate amount of feedback. Skyline Health will take a look at your stuff and recommend some things. It knows a lot. They're actually teaching it about security more and more, and so that's actually helpful too. But you'll see stuff, especially if you're a vSAN customer, you'll see stuff about drivers, you'll see stuff about host health. Anytime we learn something, network drivers, you know, and it's proactive too. You can actually take, instead of having an outage, you can actually take proactive action, you know, like heaven forbid, you know, yeah, how often does that happen? So turn it on. Another thing, monitoring, log insight. Really important to have your logs, syslogs, whatever, going to a syslog collector, log insight, that sort of thing. Log insight is a vRealize product, and I like it. You know, use what you've got. If you don't have one, you know, this one's cool as well. The have 2 of them. Don't put it inside of your environment. Think about ransomware. Somebody gets into your environment somehow. You don't want them to encrypt the log insight instance either, you know, and you don't want them to take down your syslog collector if there's an attack, and they're going to be looking for it. And especially ransomware is a great penetration test, and they've got good asset inventories, all that stuff. It's scary, and they're patient too. They know exactly how to hit you, and how much time they have. You know, because if you've got a 90-day change window before you can patch, they've got 90 days to do whatever they want. So yeah, finding your syslog stuff so that you don't know what's going on and you can't do diagnostics, that'll be important to them. Deny them that. What I used to do, I had the privilege of having 2 sites, and a site A and a site B. I'd actually run log insight clusters at both sites, and then I'd log everything at both sites to the other site as well. And that way I also could patch log insight, and I'd still have coverage on the other site. So something to keep in mind. Not everyone has the same architecture, but if you can work towards that, then that's a good thing. Capacity, performance, up, down, those are all different types of monitoring too, and make sure that you've got your bases covered. Capacity especially speaks to patching. You know, we build our clusters to be n+1, right? So if you invade that +1, how are you going to patch? You know, you've got, 15 gallons or 17 gallons of water in 4 5-gallon pails. You know, where's it gonna go? You know, you don't, and that's a great analogy. You can steal it, use it with managers. Everybody understands water in pails. So, but performance, up, down, that sort of stuff, that's pretty obvious. vSAN transport encryption. This got added vSAN 7 Update 1. One of the nice things about vSAN is when you upgrade vSphere, you get a new storage array. I mean, some people think that's bad because it's a change or whatever, but you get new features, and that's actually kind of a really nice thing. Transport encryption was one of the things that got added in that release. And it's very much like encrypted vMotion, where it doesn't need a KMS, it's not like data at rest encryption, which we'll talk about in just a second. It doesn't need anything. You can turn it on, it'll rekey itself. It doesn't have any dependencies, that sort of thing. And so turn it on, tell it what the rekey interval is, and away you go. Does it add some latency? Yeah, any encryption adds a little bit of latency. So your next question will be, well, how much latency? Well, depends on your workload. Stuff like that, hard to tell. Turn it on. If you've got a test cluster, turn it on, be ready to turn it off again, monitor, that sort of thing. But should only be a few percentage points, tops. And CPU, all of the stuff is powered by CPU instructions. It's all done in CPU, and so it's very fast. And unless you're running CPUs from 12 years ago, which you can't use this and have those CPUs because they're just not even supported, everything nowadays, everything that vSphere 7 runs on will support this in hardware, and so you're in pretty good shape. Again, CPU is very fungible is the term for it. There's a lot of it, and it's a very sort of malleable resource there. Less so RAM. RAM is more static. Disk is even less fungible. Anyhow, mentioned encrypted vMotion. Definitely recommend enabling this as well. The thought a Navy transport ship would be a good image for this. The encrypted vMotion, it is a feature at the VM level, and it comes by default as opportunistic. Flip it to required. Do this on your templates. You can do this on your VMs. And opportunistic means that if both endpoints support it, it'll do it. Required, it's a requirement now. Just turn it on and be done with it. Disk encryption. There's a couple of different options for disk encryption, as number 6 here. One, you can use VM encryption. VM encryption is basically a storage policy change. And you can do it for the VM home files. You can do it for the VMDKs for the VM, or you can do it for both. Doing it just for the home files means that you can turn on virtual TPMs, all that sort of stuff, and you don't have to wait for the VMDKs to encrypt. And that's actually kind of a gotcha with it, is that in order to, when you make this change, if you encrypt the VMDKs themselves, you have to wait. The VM has to be off in order to make this change. And then you'll wait for the entire time that it takes to re-encrypt the drive, or the VMDKs rather. And it can do it in place, and depending on how fast your storage is and things like that, that'll determine how long it takes. But if you don't want to wait, if you want to just turn it off, just encrypt the home files and then turn it back on again, there's a couple of tips and tricks. Most notably, if you're using some sort of logical volume management, or if you've got a database server that can move data internally without causing a service outage, then you can just add another VMDK that is encrypted. That'll happen almost instantaneously because there's no data on it. And then you can copy data inside the guest over to that VMDK, and then just take another outage later to remove the old drives, that sort of thing. Another gotcha with it is if you use a deduplicating storage array, it's going to turn that whole VMDK into a giant randomized blob of data. That's what ciphertext looks like, right? Encrypted data. And can you dedupe that? Not well, no. Can you compress it? Same deal, not well. And so if you've got a terabyte VMDK that you encrypt, it's probably going to be a terabyte on disk. So just keep that in mind. Don't do a whole ton of them at once if you're worried about the effects on deduplication and things. Another way to encrypt disk, talking about vSAN, is the data at rest encryption. This you do need a KMS for. There's going to be some announcements coming up soon. I should have put a disclaimer. This is like VMworld. Don't buy things that don't exist yet. But keep your eyes peeled. There's interesting things afoot here. And data at rest encryption, turning it on, you do need a key provider, whether it's a KMS or something else. And that may add complexity, may add some considerations. What happens if things are offline? What happens if somebody steals my whole host? All that sort of stuff. And so you need to think through a lot of the different ways that you could be attacked. But this helps. Data at rest encryption at the vSAN level can help with a lot of those situations. And it's respectful of its own deduplication and compression. So what you do if you want to use VTPM and you need VM encryption, and you want to use dedupe and compression at the vSAN level, you turn this on at the vSAN level, and you'll see the warning here that you'll need to reformat all of your disk groups and stuff. I think best practices right now for vSAN is to try to have 2 disk groups per host, so that the data can be kept internally if you have to do stuff like this and formatting updates and stuff like that. But regardless, you can move through it, let it do its thing. It'll take some time. It shouldn't cause any outages. It can do this seamlessly. I've seen this as a customer. I've seen it do it seamlessly in the back end. Depending on the size of everything, it'll take some time. But when it's done, it can deduplicate and compress the encrypted volumes that it creates as well. And then you can take your VMs and just encrypt the home files and let vSAN encryption deal with the VMDKs. So depending on your threat models, that might be cool, Otherwise, there's a lot of flexibility. And that's actually a really nice thing about vSphere is there's a lot of flexibility in how you can use it to address problems, address potential exposures and vulnerabilities, things like that. Speaking of exposures and vulnerabilities, let's talk about patching. I know, Bob, you say a lot about patching, and we're really tired of it. I had somebody tell me that, and I'm like, well, if you actually patched, I wouldn't have to say this. And patching is so much about patching. It relies on so many other things to be right inside your organization. You need an asset inventory. How do you know that you've patched everything unless you've got an asset inventory? And a complete one, an up-to-date one. And how do you know all your tools have that up-to-date asset inventory? That's a trickier problem than it would seem, because we're human, errors happen, things pop up in the network, that sort of thing. Capacity planning, we mentioned this before, that capacity planning, if you don't have capacity to use risk mitigation tools like vMotion to move workloads around, then you're not going to be able to patch. Or when you do patch the infrastructure, you're going to have a tough time of it. You're going to have service issues. You're going to have lag and swapping, things like that. That's not good. Last thing is change management understanding. Change managers, they're there to help mitigate risk. Help understand risk, perhaps accept risk. And they have no idea what vSphere can do. They don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. It is not their job to understand it. So we have to speak their language to help them understand. Helping educate them as far as the risk mitigation tools. Even just telling them that when you're patching infrastructure, the workloads aren't going to come down. When you reboot vCenter server to patch it, the workloads are not affected. That revelation right there was like a light bulb moment in my relationship with change managers back in the day. And hey, you guys don't understand that workloads don't actually come down when I'm doing this. And they're like, they don't? And I'm like, no. And they're like, oh. Well, why are we talking about this? And so that led to another conversation, really about ITIL. A lot of organizations use the ITSM, the service management, IT service management tools like ITIL. It's a standardized library of ideas and practices, things like that. And so it defines change in 3 different ways: standard change, normal change, and emergency change. And it is my contention at this time that we have to drive patching to either the standard change or to emergency change. This normal change stuff, attackers love the normal change. That thorough review process that's 60 days long, and the big testing processes and all that stuff. Yeah, that's great. They love it. That gives them 60 days to map your systems out and attack and find ways to hide and things. So why can't we drive it towards standard changes? Low risk changes, follows documented, repeatable tasks, and is pre-approved. Why can't we file for change requests for 9 months, 12 months ahead of time? It just says pre-approved monthly patching, and we follow a documented process, and we test it, all that sort of stuff. Or we drive it towards emergency changes. And this is where security, especially things that are listed as important or critical that come out, really need to end up as emergency changes. Urgent lack of action presents a bigger risk than actually patching. So let's talk about standard change. Sorry about all the words here, but if you want to take a screenshot, I want you to have this ammo, just planting the seeds, some ideas about dealing with organizations. Having a test environment, being honest about its effectiveness. Hey, test is never like production. Let's just admit it. Embrace the suck, okay? It is what it is. And it's not going to change, and we can pretend that it's different, or we can try to figure out a better way to do it. Rolling out staged rollouts, rolling upgrades, that sort of thing. Snapshotting vCenter server is a good idea. I've always really liked that. Pinning it to a particular host, using a DRS rule to pin it to one host with a should rule. Don't use a must rule, but use a should rule, so it can move around if it needs to, if you're patching. But it's always in one spot where you know where it is. So if there's a problem, you can go to that host. You don't have to, it's not a search and rescue operation for vCenter. Document your patching processes. Just write it down. What are you going to do? Check a box for the change managers. Proactive monthly change requests. Ask for a change freeze so you don't get storage upgrades, all that other stuff happening at the same time. Very helpful. And you'll tell your change managers that this sends a signal. Hey, I'm thinking about this stuff. And you can have a conversation about it. Have a feedback mechanism. If your patching is inconveniencing somebody, give them a way to tell you, and then you work it out. That's another big part of it. And then, like I was saying, educate your change managers about the risk mitigation features. All of this stuff, tell them about it. Tell them that it doesn't take out workloads. Then the flip side is emergency changes. When there's an emergency, use it. Get them used to the idea that security is an emergency. Define what it is. And I'll say, assume with the ransomware, we have to assume that the attacker's already in the environment. Just straight up. As much as that stinks to think about that, that's what ransomware is. And if we think about it that way, we change our perspective a little bit. So VMSA important, the VMware security advisories that are important or critical, now need to get acted on. Read the VMSA, read the CVEs, understand the outage, or not the outage, the vulnerability and how it affects you. You'll make a good call then. You can understand, sometimes there's mitigating circumstances there. And then if it meets the criteria, use it, push it. And make it clear that lack of timely action presents a high risk. I will also plant the seed. If it can't be patched, if you cannot patch during business hours, your systems won't respond well to a real failure. Period. 8, disable SSH. I've said this numerous times. I compare it to a manhole here, the service hatch. It's like leaving a manhole cover off in a parking lot. Great if you're actually in there and have warnings up and stuff like that. Bad because if you leave it like that for a long time, cars and people will fall into it. One of the things about it, everybody's root when you log in. It's meant as a service interface, a troubleshooting interface. It's meant to be off. It's meant to be disabled. We ship it that way, put it back that way. If you drive all the access in through vCenter server and the APIs, they're subject to the role-based access control. They're subject to logging, all that sort of stuff. And there's APIs for everything now in vCenter Server 7. 99% of everything. SSO is still missing. We're working on that. Audit scanning gets way easier too, because the audit scanners of the world, if it's running SSH, it assumes it's Linux. ESXi is really not Linux. It might look a little like Linux, but it's really not. And when it scans it, it's going to go bonkers. And then they're going to ask you all kinds of questions. Just shut it off. You don't need it. If you need it, turn it on tactically and turn it off again. You can script it. It's really easy to script. You can use PowerCLI to turn it on and turn it off. Super helpful. So 107. We'll skip 9 to 107. Actually, there's 107 things in the vSphere security configuration guide. This is hardening guidance, so it should be 116 probably. I guess typo on my part. But the SCG is our baseline guidance. It's a library of best practices. It's a baseline for securing your vSphere environments, and we're growing it. We were moving a lot of stuff into the product as defaults, and that's great. We're still doing that. There's still some new things that we're discovering. The product evolves just like security evolves, and we have to evolve with it. The new versions have tabs at the bottom, breaking it up into the different products. We deal with guest. VMware Tools has got some interesting security controls in it too, especially around guest customization. I just added a deprecated tab as well. So that question of, hey, where'd that security control go? Or I've got this from the old ones, but it's not in the new ones. You know where it goes now. And so you can get that. Here's a QR code for that URL. Should you scan random QR codes on the internet? Probably not. But this one maps to that redirector, and that takes you into another page, core.vmware.com/security configuration guides. And it'll have all of them for all of our supported versions, and it's got the archive of all the old stuff too. So I'm at 29 minutes here. I thank you very much. I'll leave this up on the screen if you want to take a look. If you've got any last minute questions, now's the time. Thanks for supporting VMUG, and thanks for being our customer. We really appreciate it. If there's anything we can do to help you, we don't use our products like you use our products. It's just the truth of the software industry. And so if there's something that we can do to help you, please reach out and let us know. Help us help you. We love feedback. Feedback is a gift. We really enjoy talking to you about it. So again, thank you. Stay safe. Stay warm. I'm in Wisconsin, and it's really cold right now. And so I hope you're warm. Hope you're safe. Hope you're healthy. Take care.